being able to share this more broadly. And it's something I think is very important for not just our community being the Black community, but the impact on society overall. And the rubric was started as, think of it as a playbook, a rule book, a lexicon for the number of different levers that you can pull to drive success. Whenever somebody says, hey, XYZ is successful, or A and B are successful, there are many different ways to define that and many different ways to get to the end. And I apply that to my passion being the NBA. And many times people will say, is an NBA team successful, or any sport that you like? It's not just about winning championships or winning games. There's many things that make them successful, and those levers can be pulled. And that's what I evaluate. The same way that I evaluated companies in the tech space, I apply that same thinking to the NBA. The next thing I do is then think about, how does this truly impact the Black community? And this is something that's risen in me from my experience working in tech. The majority of my career, I've been the only one in the room. I've been the only one at the table. And there are very few people that think or act like me or come from my perspective or my background. Although that I know there are a number of us out there who are in their respective spaces who feel the same way. And as an example, a few of those folks I have on this meeting, which is why I reached out to them, because I want their story to be heard along with a number of others. So the rubric is about exploring that both for the NBA and both for the Black community.
I can breathe.
Pheasant out, Pluto. Pheasant out, Pluto.
A couple of different triggers. One being just the growing dissatisfaction with the lack of representation in my industry. Being in technology, it's one of, I would argue, probably the most dominant and most successful and prominent industries in the world comes from technology. You even see that in advertising. The traditional companies like GE, the traditional companies like Ford Motor Company are all turning themselves into tech companies to be able to compete. And the heartbeat for technology, as we all know, is centering around Silicon Valley. Pockets are popping up in Utah, in the Boston area, Atlanta, as well as many locations abroad. I've just been growing dissatisfaction with the fact that there are very few of us at the table, yet those products and services are serving our communities as well. And we don't have a lot of representation. Number two is the outcry. What's transpired over the last 18 months? You know, everybody, of course, has heard the name George Floyd. But if you've been in the Black community, that's not new. It's finally getting visibility beyond our community. And I feel the need to continue to spread this message and make sure that it's not forgotten that this is not just a moment in time. It's a time of transition that needs to occur, whether you want it to or not. And I think there are far others, example being, you know, the guests that I have here today, who I think can go much further than I've gone and who have much more influence in their respective spaces than I do, that they can be seen at the top, because I don't think our stories being told are represented, much like many other groups of folks in the United States. I wanted to give this platform, so if many of you are wondering, okay, what's this really about? Consumerization of tech, sports, etc. Think about this as, it's not just, hey, what is our representation in the job market, etc. But I think a lot of what we hear, and I think we've heard this term a lot, systemic racism, institutional racism, etc. And this discussion isn't about, hey, let me try to drive a hyper focus on just police brutality and many of those things that we've heard about. But I think there's an underpinning that leads to our lack of equity and wealth in this country. And it's about representation in the areas where we see dollars moving. And dollars are moving through industries. And if we're not at the table, if we're not being represented, if we don't have a voice, I think that's what's also leading to our lack of presence. That trickles down into the racism that you see even on the streets, and police interactions and community programs, so forth and so on, that's a laundry list of things. So here, when I think about my interest in sports and Aisha, who I'll introduce, who's in sports, and Chase and Ibrahim and Nahom and their team working in the tech industry, it's really about making sure that there's leaders in these respective positions who can tell the stories. Where we all know, and one of the reasons I chose the NBA, I played the sport, of course, I played the sport of basketball, but another reason I'm so passionate about it is because the NBA and the NFL primarily are the largest industries that employs Black people in their respective sports. There's no other industry that has 70, 80% representation on the field or on the court or whatever it may be. Translated to tech, there's no place that has 70, 80% representation of the engineering room. There's no 70 to 80% representation on the editor's desk. There's no one that's represented in, pick your industry. Now, that number goes down significantly as you move above the coach, as you move into the front office, as you move further up the stack, which becomes more consistent with the rest of corporate America. But I do care about the fact that one of the products that we're discussing here is a Black community. And many times we may be a product, but we are not participating in the growth of wealth. We are not participating in the stories that are being told from a position of leadership. And in fact, I started doing a bunch of numbers. I created a video, a short form, I wouldn't even call it a film, but 7 to 8 minutes to tell the story about how we got to this point in the country where many non-Black communities are up in arms and surprised at the level of inequality. And I created a video to tell the story that it's been this way definitely since I've been alive, and definitely since my parents, my grandparents, and my grandparents' parents have been alive, which has been a consistent behavior. So now I'm getting to a point where I think it's important that everybody knows the numbers behind all of this. They should know the details behind how we got here. So when I say that Silicon Valley is a thriving industry, but yet there's only 2%, 3% of representation of Black community. Everybody supports this notion of diversity. And I kind of cringe when I hear that word because diversity typically omits the Black community. But we say that we're diverse because it's many of us, many different races in that bucket, but yet we find ourselves at the bottom still. And that's not by accident. And it's not by some action or behavior one or two people did in the last week, month, year, half decade. It's something that's grown over time. And so this discussion is a display of leaders who are in their spaces trying to make change. As quiet as it might be felt, as quiet as it might be seen, these are folks that I think can really transform the voice. And you'll hear from them in their various spaces on the tech side with startups and with sports. As you mentioned, I am an advisor for Berkeley Skydeck. And let's say, Hillary, we've been doing this, about 2 years now? Maybe 2-3 years? I have yet to see a Black-led group come out of that cohort. I've been with Free Ventures, which is another startup incubator out of Berkeley. And I came across the very first group, and that group is here today, that we want to represent, that I think should be represented. So I think it's important to see that. Funding-wise, 1% of venture-backed funds goes to Black founders, 1%. And you're in Silicon Valley, the heartbeat of all venture funding comes from these organizations. And very few are Black-led founders, and those dollars don't go to those groups to grow and innovate. So here we are. And that's the reason that I wanted to make sure that I had an opportunity to share about what this is. All right, so enough about me, enough about this. I will have a question that I do want to pose to everyone, but I definitely want to introduce the group that I have here that I wanted to showcase that's much greater than what I'm doing. And I want to introduce two specific groups of folks. One is a startup that I mentioned that came out of Free Ventures, which is an incubator that's a part of the Berkeley, out of UC Berkeley. Very similar, the feeder program into many of you have heard of Skydeck, would be in that same vein. And it's basically students who are starting companies who are looking for guidance. And there's a bunch of advisors who wanted to give this platform. So if many of you are wondering, okay, what's this really about? Consumerization of tech, sports, etc., and nurture these early stage startups as they're forming their teams while they're still completing their education. So I think that shouldn't be overlooked, that these are not just full-time founders, there are students as well. And that group is called Black Book U. I'll let them tell their story around what their product and their technology is, but suffice it to say, it is there's a member of that founding team, Ibrahim, who's on that group, and I want to have him introduce his group, share a bit about who they are, and then I'll go. I want to introduce the next speaker. So, Ibrahim, can you give us 1 or 2 minutes on you and your team, so folks know who you are?
Absolutely. That was fire, by the way. That was a beautiful, beautiful intro. Everything, and thank you for setting the stage, Brandon, Hillary, and Steve. So my name is Ibrahim Balde. I was born in Oakland, California, raised in Alameda, and as Brandon mentioned, I graduated from UC Berkeley Oz last December. I studied finance and social entrepreneurship. I'm here with Chase and Nahum. I'll let them introduce myself before I give the 1 to 2 minute.
Yeah. Hi everybody, I'm Chase. Thank you everyone for coming. Brandon, I'm a big fan of your shirt, by the way. But yeah, I'm Chase, I'm from LA. I graduated UC Berkeley class of 2020, studied political economy, and for Black Book, I do our marketing and digital content and really tell the narrative of these students at these predominantly white institutions.
Good evening, everybody. It's an honor to be with all of you. My name is Nahum Solomon. I'm a Berkeley native and soon to be Cal alumni, studying political science.
Nice.
Co-founder of Black Book as well, mainly focused on aligning our business strategy with our operational timelines and supporting our legal development. And our team pretty much came together collectively based on our shared experiences and honestly our obstacles as Black students within our collegiate journeys. And we just came together to try and innovate a solution to empower our communities and students that live just like us.
Yeah, and to really just dissect that, during our time at UC Berkeley, representation in our student population was essentially 3%. And so when you think about kind of the brand of UC Berkeley itself, it really kind of exuberates this idea of social justice, racial equality, all these different elements. But in our experience, that's not something that we necessarily felt. We felt that, navigating the collegiate environment was a challenge. When it comes to our student populace, we're graduating 16% less than our peers. And so all of this led us to really try to understand and identify ways in which we can leverage technology and a cohesive platform to enrich and empower the Black student experience, starting here at UC Berkeley. And that's how we came up with the idea of Black Book University. What we do is essentially centralize resources, information, mentorship networks for Black students so that the moment they walk into a campus, they don't have to feel lost or, surprised about the difficulties of navigating a campus like UC Berkeley. We want to ease that for them. We want to make them feel welcome. And that's essentially what we do. So thank you for being here.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for joining and Black Book U team. I'm going to have you kind of dive a bit deeper into a couple of other topics, but before we do that, I want to introduce the next young lady who's also going to speak as well. And I feel honored to have met this young lady and been impressed with her career and her position and her courage to stand up in a sea of many folks that do not look or act or think like she does. And this young lady is with the NFL, produces her own show, which many of you have seen, if you watch the NFL, I should say, which you may have seen, but she takes a stance beyond the field that says, I want to tell the stories coming from the Black community. And if anybody knows about the NFL, 75% Black. Many of those players are coming from the neighborhoods that I come from, that Chase, Ibrahim, and this young lady comes from. and beyond. The stories that come out of a lot of the issues that you've seen over the last 18 months and beyond, this is where many of those players come from and get characterized as bad or whatever the case may be. And she uses her platform to tell their stories and tell the stories beyond just those players, but their families and the communities that they come from. She's also a 2-time Emmy nominee, 1 or 2-time Emmy winner. And I am honored to introduce Aisha to this discussion as well. And I'd love for you to just give us a few minutes on your background, Aisha, and what you're doing. But nonetheless, Aisha Chaney.
Thank you very much, Brandon. That was a hell of an introduction. So I appreciate that, and thank you for having me be a part of this. As he just mentioned, my name is Aisha Chaney, and I am a 2-time Emmy Award-winning producer. I have been in the industry as of yesterday, actually, for 17 years. I started my career for 9 years at ESPN in Bristol, Connecticut, and then I also, when we launched the LA Sports Center back in 2009, I transferred. But for the past 8 years, I have been with the NFL Network, and I produce NFL Total Access. And, you know, as Brandon said, like this year in particular, just in light of everything that's gone on in the world, you know, the word that we use a lot is just applying pressure. You know, like we just want to continue to apply pressure because, you know, this is the NFL we're talking about. Change doesn't come easily, but between knowing that we have, for what I do, like I produce content, so I have a say in what you guys see on TV. And ironically, as I sit here right now, the sports Emmys are on, and my show got nominated for an Emmy, and 4 of the 5 things that were on that Emmy reel were things that had to, how can I word this? They were things that maybe we never would have done before in the past, you know, but because we have that representation, because we have a Black host, because we have Black producers, because you have Black analysts, you know, like we are making sure that we are talking about certain things that are important, and just being in that space, knowing how much representation matters. We're just going to continue to do it, continue to put our foot on the gas. And if I'm looking down at my phone a lot, it's because my friends or my colleagues are texting me, letting me know whether or not we won. So far, I can tell you that Nate Burleson, he's one of our studio analysts for Good Morning Football, and then he does a bunch of other stuff as well. I've worked with him on Total Access before, but he just won for Best Studio Analyst. So salute to him. I know you guys all know who he is. But yeah, nice. And then on top of being a producer and producing content for the network, another big role, like, I don't know if you can see it on my shirt, but it says Black Engagement Network. I'm a co-chair for our Black Engagement Network in Los Angeles. And then I'm also, I sit on our Media and Business Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee that, you know, every single company formed a DEI committee after George Floyd was murdered. You know, everybody knows that, but I sit on the one here. There's only about 16, 17 of us. And, you know, it's really just working with HR and all the EVPs across the company to just try to make a difference and affect change and, you know, get more Black people in the building, get more diversity in the building, like all of that. And like I said, it's not an easy thing to do, but would not be able to live but with myself if I just sat by and didn't try. So that is Absolutely. A brief little synopsis on what I have going on over here.
Absolutely. Makes perfect sense. And I appreciate you just taking the time to come out and share some of your thoughts. And that's something that I think we discussed before, which I think sums up, I think, why many of us are here, even if we haven't used those words. And it really is about applying pressure and not accepting, because I think that's what's happened for a long period of time. It's, hey, just do your time, just sit still, just, hey, it'll come. And I think what we've experienced collectively is that it doesn't just come. And we see opportunities that are just passing by with the spirit of waiting and hoping. And I think this is a step of many of us to really step up. So with that said, that's just a high level overview of, I think, of what they're doing. And I just want to I'll start with you, Ibrahim, Chase, Nahom.
Doesn't out Pluto. Doesn't out Pluto.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that. And I think a lot of what motivated us is it's a couple things. First off, like Ibrahim touched on earlier, it was our personal experience, right? We went through those classrooms, we've been on campus, and we felt things such as imposter syndrome and being underrepresented. And then on top of that, Ibrahim one day comes home, he's like, bro, I found out they used to have this resource in the 1990s. It was called the African American Student Handbook, Black Book for short. And students could come to campus and immediately have that navigational capital and resources and Black faculty that they could reach out and help them maximize their time at Cal. So we knew we wanted to create a product at that point, and we had a couple events and kind of tested the idea out with the community and got great feedback. But one thing that someone said specifically that stood out at our event was from an MBA student named Evan. And he said a lot of people in Silicon Valley are trying to create these quote unquote solutions for communities that they don't interact with and for problems that they don't understand. And for us, that really stuck with us because a lot of the solutions and tools out there are not made by Black people or people of color, and they don't really understand the problems that we interact with. And I think the last thing that, obviously being in the Bay Area and surrounded by technology, is we just wanted to get involved in that startup atmosphere in the tech world, but we didn't know where to start. We didn't have the business fraternities or these consulting clubs that different groups may have. So what we had to do was create something on our own. And with that, I'll pass it to Ibrahim.
Yeah, like Chase mentioned, I think the narrative of kind of the history on our campus, you know, the legacy of Black excellence was something that was completely absent from when we walked into the doors. And what we did realize, you know, as Gen Z, is that the technology that we use every day, you know, it has amplified how people connect, how people interact. But how could we, you know, utilize that and center it and, you know, empower it to serve our community? And, you know, as Chase and Nahom mentioned, like, we did grow up here in the Bay Area. And, you know, Brandon mentioned how, you know, a lot of the times when it comes to having a seat at the table, you know, we're not necessarily talked about, we're not necessarily thought about. And that's a key element that we wanted to address, right? Like, how can we create a lane in which we're utilizing the same tools that, you know, UC Berkeley students are coming out of here, graduating, creating companies, creating massive amounts of wealth for their communities. How can we utilize that and apply it to something that's inherently beneficial to, you know, our communities? Because a lot of the times when we think about this journey in an educational environment, what is it for really? Is it to just sit in classes and kind of like, you know, I guess engage, do a couple assignments and whatnot? No, it's to get a job. It's to elevate your your experience, your social standing. And a lot of the times our students and our communities and people like us, we don't necessarily know how to navigate that. We don't necessarily know how to manage that. And what we decided, taking a step back, is how can we ease that process? How can we make it so that someone who enters an environment doesn't necessarily have to go through the difficulties of feeling like a failure or feeling like they don't belong? Because that process isn't going to stop at the university level. You're not going to be the only person in the classroom. You're going to also be the only person in a team once you do enter the corporate, you know, space and whatnot. So for us, it was really a matter of pulling and leveraging the ideas of community, the ideas of mentorship in a way that was authentic, in a way that was unique, and really kind of applying our perspective to it. Yeah. And the first thing that comes to mind is essentially gaining validation of the problem from the larger tech community, right? So Brandon talked about Skydeck, he talked about Free Ventures. A lot of these ecosystems like he mentioned, right? They don't have a lot of participation from people like us. And so early on, as we were trying to define this problem, we got a lot of pushback in the sense that, oh, this might not be something that entrepreneurship or technology can solve. And so we wanted to challenge that, right? A lot of the times when you think of issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, it's kind of relegated to an organization or a club. I think our team would argue that it's issues like these that inherently need innovation. They need people to be thinking about how can we apply a business kind of model, a business framework around issues like this? How can we amplify and magnify these experiences as legit business cases and problems to then be solved? And so I think early on, people would say it's not necessarily innovative. And for us, while our technology, might be similar to Facebook where you can find groups and community, it might not be super innovative, but the challenge and the problem that we're trying to solve, I would argue that it's extremely, extremely innovative. And I'll leave it for Chase and Nahum to build on that.
Yeah, for sure. Just building on that, going back to another obstacle of finding those resources of where to start. I kind of touched on it earlier. A lot of groups have these consulting clubs, or they'll have these business groups where you have an idea and they have the resources to walk you through where to start, what to do. But for us, it was literally starting from scratch. Everything we did, we had to Google it, look it up. This is how we need to begin. And then luckily we were able to get into this free ventures program where Brandon was able to help mentor us and provide us and kind of shed light in the right direction that we need to go. But like Ibrahim said, touching on that, a lot of times we would pitch in these meetings. And like you said, our problem wasn't validated by them. How is this going to make money was their first point. But in reality, we know that this problem is validated because the community supported it. We did a Kickstarter and we raised over $20,000 within a few weeks. We've been on social media and all our posts are being shared and getting high engagement. So we know that the community needs it. I think the obstacle is kind of proving to others that aren't within our specific community that is needed.
Man, that's spot on. And something I'll add to that is what I've noticed and what really drove me to this is the fact many times startups are solving a problem that the founders have. That's how startups are founded. Let's be crystal clear. And the problems that on average, people making $250,000 to $500,000, the problems that they have are significantly different. And the problems that they're trying to solve as founders is something that doesn't reach communities that don't have those volumes. This is why you have certain products and technologies coming out of Silicon Valley that aren't meeting the needs of folks in my hometown, like Akron, Ohio. Like, take a place in parts of New Jersey, DC, Atlanta, Chicago, the south side of Chicago, Houston, Texas, the pockets where our communities live, though there are many other parts of the country, of course. But what you have is a misalignment of that. And when founders like Chase and others are solving problems for their communities, they're seen as different. They're seen as odd. They're seen as not quite as effective, or they don't actively visualize the revenue opportunity because they don't know the space, they don't know the target audience, etc. And when you don't know that, it's hard for you to predict. When you're in a bucket or a community where everybody's doing the exact same thing, making the exact same money, so forth and so on, I think that's the case. So hats off to you and your team for doing that as well.
I'll just talk about our progress so far and then pass it to someone else. But most recently, we were able to get a Black student that's going to be a junior elected as ASUC president. So he's going to be in the main leadership position at UC Berkeley. Along with that, we've been able to get our app under development to almost 90% completion. And we launched the Discord community to start driving community immediately.
Yeah, and I'll say in addition to that, like a tremendous win for our team was, so there's a contest on campus and through the UC system called the Big Ideas Contest. We were selected as finalists and also kind of uniquely honored with the CDSS Discovery Award. I think it's the Division of Computing and Data Science. And so we were acknowledged and we felt even more validated and energized coming into the summer. But I think when it comes to our plans, it's really to kickstart and launch this app come the fall semester so that we can build a community, a centralized community for incoming students, current students, alumni, graduate students and faculty, just so that they can kind of celebrate and come together in a unique space. But following that, I think the next dimensions that we hope to explore is what I touched upon earlier is like, folks are coming through university to find employment. We want to create a platform that is authentically speaking to the Black community in terms of how to find jobs and how to be and access employment in corporate workspace, nonprofit, startups, etc. We really want to bridge the gap between mentors and advocates such as Brandon to folks like Chase and I and Naum, who were in positions where we didn't know necessarily what to do, once we graduated. So employment is the next step, but right now we're really driven on community building. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It means a variety of things, but the biggest word that comes to mind is probably accountability, because you encounter a lot of different leaders, and we're in all these meetings, and people want to talk about how can they help. It's like the three things that we say more than anything. We're just like, hire more Black people, retain more Black people, and get more Black employees in positions of leadership. Like, we talk all the time about how much representation matters, and our numbers are just really, really low. Like for what I do, and it's not just like this at the NFL. Like, I'm by no means am I just putting this on the NFL. It was the same way when I was at ESPN, but for what I do specifically, there are 42 people in production, from the production assistant level all the way up to like vice president / executive producer. And I'm like middle of the road. I'm a manager / producer, and I'm the only Black female. Not like one of 5, one of 3, but the only one. And there are maybe 4 Black men going from the PA level up to like the coordinating producer level. So that's such few numbers, and that's just my department. But it's tough right now because we're trying to live through a pandemic and move past that. So there's been a hiring freeze, there's promotion freezes. How can you get people to stay when you can't promote them? You can't give them more money. You give them other opportunities, but then they look at it as, oh, I'm just like working harder and doing all this extra work for the same amount of money. And it's been tough. It's been really, really tough just watching so many talented young Black employees just walking out of the building and going elsewhere. So we're doing whatever we can to just continue to just talk to leadership, ask the questions, hold them accountable. Like, every single time we have a town hall meeting, there's a pay equity question always comes up because we haven't gotten an answer yet. Like, well, what's going on with the pay equity study? Like, can you give us an update? Just continuing to ask the questions, continuing to speak up. Like, another thing that I would say is like amplification. I'm very, very, very big on that. Like, I don't think that, it's not just, oh, like, I'm successful, so I don't want there to be any other successful women. Like, no, I want to lift up as many other people, like pick someone else's crown, like open the door for someone else, mention somebody's name in a room that they're not in. Like, I've had so many different meetings with like SVPs, EVPs, didn't even know who half of these people were before this past year, but just being in these different leadership roles that I'm in now and being in these rooms, it's because someone mentioned my name and now I'm in the room. I still don't necessarily have the title, but that's okay. Like, and one COO in particular, or one of the EVPs in particular, mentioned to me one time, like, he kind of challenged me. He was just like, just because you're in this room with all these people, like, don't feel like you can't say what's on your mind. Like, we want to hear what you have to say. and he kind of like empowered me. He, a white man, you know, he empowered me to just continue to use my voice, continue to speak up. And he told me, it's like, what you have to say is valuable. And so it's like, say less. You only have to tell me that one time. Like, I will, every single time I'm in a meeting now, like, I'm going to be the person, I'm going to be speaking up. I'm going to be asking what's going on with that. I'm going to be saying, oh, okay, there's cautious optimism that the hiring freeze could end in June or July. So next time we meet, we'll follow up on that. You know, we ask that question. We don't just kind of sit back and see, you know, is this going to happen? Is that going to happen? Like, you just continue to ask the questions. And then when it comes to like the content space, that's one thing that like that's my bag, so to speak. But myself and another producer who's in the feature producer realm, his name is Anthony Smith, really good friend of mine. He's a co-chair of the Black Engagement Network with me. Like, he's like the best producer of content that we have at the company, and he's amazing. And we just really do a good job working together and kind of controlling that content space and continuously pushing ideas. Like, we had an incredible Black History Month, just doing all types of things. And it's just cool to kind of see the impact that we can have when we're intentional, you know, and we just remind people all the time, like, be intentional. If you're intentional, then like you will see a result. And you just keep reminding people, keep applying that pressure, keep your foot on the gas, however you want to word it. That's another huge thing that we're doing, which, by the way, I forgot to mention, I went to Howard University. Like, I usually make sure that I say that in every panel that I speak on, but I do. So went to Howard, and one of the things that I actually got involved with the National Association of Black Journalists when I was at Howard. And ironically, it's how, you know, how there's just like a lot of nepotism at different companies you go to, or you have people hiring, oh, like, I went to college with that guy, so I'm going to hire him, or I know him, or that's my brother's friend. Like, there's a lot of that goes on at every single company. Okay. Like, by no means am I talking about the NFL at all right now. But the cool thing about being a part of the National Association of Black Journalists, like, they have this monthly convention, not monthly, yearly. And that's how I got my start in the industry. Like, I went to one of the conventions and I met the hiring manager from ESPN. His name was Fred Brown. And very long story short, like, I got an internship at ESPN the summer of my junior year. And basically he was like, keep in touch with me your senior year, and as long as your review's good, you have a job waiting for you when you graduate. So like, that's what happened. And I've always had like a passion in my heart for giving back and for being a part of NABJ and just, again, opening that door for others. And so when I first got to NFL Network, I was just like, why don't we have a booth at the NABJ convention? And they're like, what is that? They didn't even know what it was. And I was like, yo, like, it's been around for so long. And for there to be like over 45, 50, however many companies that go to that convention, for the NFL to not have a presence, it really, really bothered me. So I talked to HR, did whatever I could. And long story short, it's been like 5-6 years now that we have had a yearly presence at that convention. And it's grown over the years. And we were like one of the executive sponsors last year or 2 years ago. And then last year we had 3 NABJ interns for the NFL. So it's like, we've made an impact and we're doing something about it. And that's just like one small example. The other thing I would say is just, see, when your kid walks in the room, they just take that idea that's like right on the tip of your tongue. It's like, I know I wanted to talk about NABJ, and then there was something else that you said. One of the meetings that we were in about 6-7 months ago. No, it was when Biden and Kamala won. Our chief people officer at the time, or one of the EVPs, said, she was like, you know, nobody can use as the excuse like, oh, there's no, she said, now that the vice president of the United States is a woman of color, like, she said, I don't want to hear anybody ever say anything about, oh, I couldn't find a qualified candidate. I couldn't find a diverse candidate. I couldn't find a Black woman. I couldn't find a Black man, Hispanic man, whatever. Like, you cannot use that as an excuse, because it's like the second highest position, and it's just a matter of getting people in those positions who have that decision-making power to see like, okay, well, guess what? Like, I'm not going to fill the role until I find someone that who is qualified. You know, you don't just have to go straight to the person that you know. So there are things that are in the works, and we finally have a chief diversity officer at the NFL. He's been excellent, and he's implementing some things, and we've kind of gotten to a point where, you know how we have the Rooney Rule for football? Doesn't always work because the owners, that's a whole different story. Like you cannot tell the owners what to do. Like that's how it works. Okay. But for the business side of things, you know, they're incorporating something where, you know, they're making sure that the final list of candidates, that it's not just like that, like there's some diversity, you know, like I don't know by how much, but like they're just doing things. So it's like, I'm not saying it's because we've continued to apply the pressure, but they are starting to change things. And the last few, in a meeting I was just in 3 weeks ago, we just met the new VP, because we didn't have any Black VPs in LA or at NFL Films. We have 2 now. That's still only 2. That's not a lot, but that's progress, you know? So it's like, it's going to take like baby steps sometimes. Man, that is an excellent question. And it's hard, you know, it really is hard, because you get so tired sometimes, and you're just like, man, like I really just want more people who look like me to like in the building, you know, like I am happy to be the only one, and I'm happy to do the job, but it just makes me work harder. And, you know, it makes me try to find another person that I can just bring into the building, you know, and I step up to the challenge, you know, and I'm not like, oh, woe is me by any means. Like I try to use it to my advantage, you know, and some people try to say like, oh, well, you know, you've got the 2 things working for you. Like you're a minority and you're a woman. And it's like, how could anybody say that that's working for me? Like, are we living in the same world? Like, if anything, those are the 2 things that make it harder for me. And then on top of that, I didn't even say this part. I'm a single mom, and my son is 6 and he has autism. So like, that's where the inclusion piece for me, like really just lights a fire inside of me. That's why I had no problem accepting that role, being on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, because my son gets discriminated against to this day. And you better believe it's like there's mama bear in here, and I'm Black, and I'm a female. So it's like there's all these things technically like working against me. But if anything, it just drives me more. And I'm like very, very like faith-based. I'm a Christian. And I know that like one of my best friends tells me all the time, her favorite saying is like, no one can take what is meant for you, period. Like nobody, it's not any of these managers, bosses, whoever. Like if God has something in store for you, you're going to get it. Timing's everything. It may not happen when you want it to happen, but guess what? No one can take what's meant for you. So just continue to, you know, be the vessel. Like I feel like I'm a vessel and God's using me to try to create change. And, you know, I don't know when my time's going to be up with the NFL, but wherever I go next or however much longer I'm at the company, I want to continue to keep using my voice and trying to make a difference.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Those of you in the room, you know, we've been at this probably now for almost an hour. I want to give you an opportunity to ask questions or share a thought. If you don't have anything, perfectly fine, no pressure. Nah, it's pressure. What do you think? Like, what's on your minds based on what you've heard from Chase and what he's gone through, and Ibrahim and Home and Aisha?
You have a question, why don't you raise your hand? Use the reaction button and the raise hand function, and we can call on you once we see that. No questions, huh?
No worries. So,
Amy has a question. as a comment?
Amy, you got a question? Okay.
I do. It's kind of a question and kind of a comment. I put this in the chat. There's no question that people who are, I'm sorry, not white men, are in the minority in every conversation. Hillary and I go way back, and the conversations about women in tech, in corporate, in finance, in banking, in every industry are the same conversations that we are, thank goodness, having now about race. And they're very complementary. And my observation is that these topics kind of bubble up every few years. Oh, there's no pipeline. We don't know any women. Oh, we don't know any Black people. Oh, I'm sorry, that's a big giant pile of hokum. And Aisha, you said that, there's plenty of great people, and you can go back to Bush's days of binders full of women. And if you don't, I'm dating myself, but I think it's really important if we don't all work in our organizations to make sure that those metrics and having, increasing diversity in the workplace in all of the forms, if that is not a priority that senior executive managers are measured on, it won't happen. And it can't just be measured this year because it's in the news and it's topical. It has to be, along with maximize shareholder value, it has to be one of the things that they are continually measured on, because it's too easy to get comfortable. And well, we paid attention to that. We increased our diversity by whatever percent, or we added a person of whatever onto our board. And you turn around a year later and people are like, see, that person left, or that initiative failed. So making sure that we hold people accountable for it is so critical.
I couldn't agree more. And one thing I'll add to that, which is, I think, what drove me to start this. One of the things I flinched on when I was writing the synopsis is there's something I don't really appreciate, and you don't see it in the description or in what we're talking about, is the word diversity. I'm not talking about diversity. We use diversity, I think, many times to bundle and group large segments of non-white people together, and to be able to say that you hit a metric. And I think change happens when you have an extremely high level of specificity. Extremely high level. Meaning, I'll use, and I think it's wonderful, I think it's great, there have been calls for women in leadership, but that's highly specific. And I think it comes from the top down. To add on to what you're saying, Amy, is a top-down view of the CEO, the board of directors, the chairman. When they make a decision, they audibly make that decision. They put that decision in writing and documentation, and they say, I am going to have 5% of my leadership women. I am going to have a woman on my board. I love that. Mm-hmm. And now I'm raising my hand and I'm saying, let's be specific and put Black people in that group.
I could not agree more.
Until there's a statement that says from the executive leadership team, that comes from founders, that comes from board of directors, that says, not diversity. I don't want a diverse candidate. I want a Black man or woman in XYZ position. I want a Black man or woman in the board of directors. Until that occurs, I don't think it happens, because I don't think it comes from the bottom up. Because, like you said, we all know everybody works towards what our leaders say are the top 3 to 5 things on the scorecard. Beyond that, I think that's what happens. And what Aisha's speaking to, what Chase and Ibrahim and Nahom are speaking to, is that very fact, is that we don't have a voice that's being specific about this group. And when you bundle it into diversity, you know what ends up at the bottom of that diversity group? Me. To answer your question, absolutely. I do think it's a much broader problem, and this is the systemic problem of, focusing on, the monetary, the financial gain, et cetera, I think plays a big role. But I also think there's a human behavior at work here, which is you're most comfortable with what looks like, feels like, seems like, feels like me. And when I say me, whoever you are as an individual person, and that's what you go with. And I think there's an attraction to always get the same flavor into a space to make decisions. And that's what happens in a lot of companies, a lot of teams, sports, whether it's startups, doesn't matter. The space really doesn't matter at that point, I believe.
Just to piggyback off of that, there's definitely a lot of, what they had us do like unconscious bias training at work. And the word that they used was similarity bias. And like, that's 100% what you see happening all of the time, exactly like you just said. But going back to what you were talking about right before that, I wanted to say two things about being intentional in hiring and saying like, like we want, right now there's only 10% Black people at the company. By next year, let's have 20%. Like a company that has done a phenomenal job of that. You guys know LeBron and Mav Carter and like their Spring Hill corporation. Like I like screenshotted, you can see it here or not, but it says the king and the CEO and the king. And I'm just going to read 2 lines from this, but it said, "We started this company almost 5 years ago. And while I love every project we do and every story we tell, I'm most proud of our team and the message we're sending. Over 100 employees with 64% people of color and 40% female in an industry that averages just 25%. Then he put in parentheses, and we will get to 50%. Like they've been a company for 5 years and like they get it. It's not, I do understand, but I don't understand like why so many different companies make it sound like it's so hard to get there, and I understand that maybe it means they don't want to trim the fat and they don't want to get rid of the people who've been there for 20 years and who are boys with the VP. Like, well, maybe your boy isn't that good at his job. And like, there's somebody else that needs to come in and take over for him. Like I've seen that a lot. I saw it at ESPN. I see it where I work now. I hear a lot of different people talk about it. It happens at their job too. And the second part of that is a friend of mine was in a focus group at work the other day. And she brought up a very, very good point. And she said, the part that I don't understand about us creating all this change is, how do you expect the same white leaders, for lack of a better word to categorize them, how do you expect these same white leaders to make the change now when they didn't before? So now it's like, okay, because this happened, now they have to, want to have a more diverse workforce. They have to want to go find the best Black person for the job. Like it's how do you expect them to be able to do that? Honestly, like I don't have the answer to that question. And when the question was raised, I was like, I never really just looked at it. Like it sounds so simple and like it's just like simple math, but I don't have the answer to that. You just expect them to change and to shift their thinking because they're being told to, or because they're being asked to, or they just woke up and they just have like a different like wokeness and understanding about them. No, that's not how it's going to happen, but that's why the pressure needs to keep being applied, because whatever you got to do, like maybe we'll be the ones who help create the change, because you can't just expect 15, 20 or 8 people to just wake up with a change of heart and want to like do the right thing. We're talking about equity here. Okay. We're not talking, this is not rocket science. It's just being intentional. That's it. You just have to like be human and care.
For me, I'll go first. Yes, I was lucky. So some of my background, I left Akron, Ohio. I'm from Akron, Ohio, and moved out to the Bay in 99. And my mentors at that time were other entrepreneurs who were working on a project that I was working on. They helped me through the process of starting my own company, starting my own consulting company, etc. I really catapulted when I found a mentor that helped me get into Microsoft. And my mentor at Microsoft was the first Black intern at Microsoft. And his charter was, because at the time, Microsoft only recruited from a list of 20 schools. Berkeley was on that list, Stanford, Wharton, MIT, Columbia. There's a list of 20 schools. If you're not on those schools on that list, you're likely not getting into Microsoft unless somebody knows you, so forth and so on. And his charter was, he's from Howard as well. And he brought students from Tuskegee, Howard, North Carolina A&T, a number of Black schools. And I was at a NSBE conference, now Society of Black Engineers, and I was able to get in through networking and meeting him. So to answer your question in short, yeah, I think mentors is important, but it's also somebody willing to take action. Many times I think mentorship is overstated by, hey, is there somebody who's going to coach you up and help you and do this? Yeah, awesome. But many times on the other side of the fence, that's not the case. It's somebody that was willing to say, I'm going to slot you in this position. You may or may not be ready. You may or may not be the ideal candidate, but I'm going to put my name on the line and slot you into this role. I'm going to make sure that you get some funding. I'm going to make sure that you get some money, so forth and so on. I think that's the next step to mentorship, not just coaching, because I think a lot of times people get hung up in, I've got to be right, I've got to have the right skill set, etc. So for me, that's how it really started my career, as somebody that was willing to put their neck on the line and help me get to the next step.
So at my company, sorry, I was just gonna to answer the question about so twofold. We started in the Black Engagement Network that I'm one of the co-chairs of. Our New York side, there's 3 offices. There's the New York where the league office is. There's NFL Films in New Jersey, and then out here in LA, there's NFL Network. And our New York co-chair is kind of spearheaded, but we called it the Black Engagement Network Mentorship Program. And we did like a 5-month program. We just took it up on ourselves. Like, okay, well, if the company's not going to create one, like we'll create one. And now it went so well, and we got so much phenomenal feedback that that other departments, like a guy from marketing and then a different team, they're like, oh, we're going to take your format and we're going to just build one for our department now. We're going to build one. And it's like, that's great. Like if we could set that up for you to just take it and then keep it going, then that's awesome. The second part of it is in the DEI committee that I'm a part of, when I was focused on the advanced side of things, like how can we advance employees? Attrition of staff is very bad right now with so many people leaving, with there being hiring freeze, promotion freeze, etc. So one of the things that we created was something called executive office hours. So it's not like a full-on mentorship program, but where we had VPs and above sign up, and we're in Q2 right now, and I'm overseeing Q2. Like I literally last week spent 4 or 5 days matching 120 participants with 42 VPs and above. And like I followed like a criteria. It took me a while, but we gathered the learnings from the first quarter and just applied it to the second this time. But it went very, very well, because you have all these, VPs and above that are willing to give 4 to 6 different employees their one-on-one time, and we prepped everyone. We made sure that we did like a coaching session. We gave them best practices, like a list of like 15 different questions that would be like, what do you do when you're sitting across from, the chief administrative officer? Or what do you do when you're sitting across from the VP of films, or the executive producer of whatever, or the COO of the entire company, or the guy who runs the entire LA building? Like there's a lot of great people. And the cool thing about it, because of course we did like a survey to gather the feedback. Again, I said we gathered the learnings and applied it. the cool thing that I got from the survey was that they gave every executive a 5 out of 5 in terms of participation. Like, they were very engaged. They followed up. About one of the questions on the survey was, have you had a second meeting with them, or have they introduced you, or what did you get out of it? And a lot of people said nothing but positive things. And they said, yes, we have continued a relationship. Yes, it's turned into an organic mentorship. Yes, I'm now I'm going to go shadow this person at work. Or yes, I told them what my aspirations were, and now they connected me with the VP of marketing and with that person. So it's a cool little program. And like, some people can just be like, oh, like that's not going to help at all. But it's like, hey, for the people who like really want to take control of their career and just try and just network or meet a new coworker, look at it like that. It's like we just had that as an opportunity. So it's a program I'm certainly happy to be a part of. And it's like, okay, well, while I can't, force anybody to like not have a hiring freeze or a promotion freeze, I can at least try to do something to make things better for the employees that are still here.
And I just want to add, like from my perspective, and I'm sure Chase and Nam could agree, just being so early on in your career, I think it's really important to have people within your network that are in the positions that you want to be. And so for us, one key relationship is Brennan, right? He has given us the ability to kind of visualize ourselves 10 years down the line, 15 years down the line, whatever it might be, in a way that we haven't before. Because a lot of the times people like us, we don't necessarily have those role models in those positions. And I think that's a big element in what we do with Black Book. Right now, we're working with the Black Alumni Association at UC Berkeley to create a mentorship program. We know that the technology piece is important, but beyond that, an integral part of what we do is programming. And then I'll say like another important component to what our philosophy is this idea of peer-to-peer mentorship. So sometimes you might not need that mentor that's, in that career that you want to be, but you might need that mentor who's maybe 2 or 3 years older than you, right? You have an exam and you don't know how to navigate that. Sometimes you just need somebody to be like, look, this is what it looked like a couple years ago. This is how I navigated it, and I can put you on game. And that's what we want to streamline. That's what we want to empower. So yeah, I think it's super important. And then I think the last thing is having like advocates, right? Like I think something that we've been taught is creating a personal board of advisors, right? People that can essentially just champion you to get to where you want to go. And those are the things that we want to empower and create, especially within our platform.
I think I get the question, and help me if I got it. You're noticing a trend that AI and machine learning is being created by people who are not actually in control of those machines over time, but yet the initial bias, the initial design, the initial development comes from a biased point of view, meaning the machines itself then have carried forward that bias and that lack of equality in whatever they do in that space. Do I have it about right? Is that about right? Okay. Yep. And I would agree 1000%. I've been in AI. That's the space I'm in. And that's kind of what I'm alluding to, is that our development, our engineering, our design teams are biased in and of themselves, and they're creating machines to do that. Microsoft saw this with what's the name of it? It is with the Xbox, it was the video camera. I forget, the Kinetic or whatever it was, the Kinect or something like that.
Kinect.
Yeah, the Kinect. It didn't recognize dark skin. And they didn't even think about the fact that, we can't actually detect a Black person because it was darker, and they need to actually recall that. So that's an example of that. We see it in a lot of the AI engines that are out there as well. Yeah. I agree with that 1000%. And so long as the language that you used is carried forward, I agree with that. What I've noticed that's happened in initiatives like that the higher the figure, meaning the person, the more money involved, the more broad those opportunities become, and Black people, Black students lose the opportunity. As long as it's super specific that helps those like Chase, those like Ibrahim, those like Nahom that are at Berkeley who are underrepresented have an opportunity to have an authentic discussion, I'm behind that 1000%.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful question. And I'll definitely let some space for Chase and Nahom to answer, but off the top of my head, the quickest thing that I could think of is essentially visibility. So I know a lot of schools like Stanford and you think of Harvard, all the Ivies, they have such a robust like system in which you can access the people who are in the positions that you want to be at, the companies you want to be. And I don't necessarily see that for our campus or our community. I think one great step is one kind of the conversation and dialogue that we're creating today, in which student communities can directly engage and communicate with folks like yourself, folks like Hillary, whoever is an alumni, because I think ultimately, like, we don't know who's out there. And I know we have tools that are on like the internet and whatnot, but the truth is, and the reality is, like, people our age, we don't use those, or we don't utilize them the way that we need to. And so I think programming and, authentic dialogue like this are really where it comes to fruition. Chase, I see you.
Yeah, just building off that visibility, I think a huge component of that is getting that visibility out early and often. I know for me, a lot of my networking and mentorship didn't come until my last semester of my senior year. And part of that's on me, but a lot of it is that I didn't know those resources were out there. And if I had those connections my freshman year and made these organic connections with mentors and different people in positions that I would like to be in one day, I think it would have been more natural. I didn't make those mentorships till the very end. And then it was kind of like I was asking something from them right away. And then now they feel like they're being used and that I only want something from them other than just getting advice. So I think that getting those early connections is very important too.
Yeah, Chase and Eve, I definitely agree with everything you guys are saying. And I want to answer this both like personally and along with what I've realized while working on Black Book. And it's that like there are amazing initiatives that have like, truly good intentions that exist, but it's just misaligned or it's not connected with whether it's the students or whatever audience you're really trying to connect with. Eve, I think you mentioned it, but it's just a little bit about the difference between the presence being there and like being acknowledged and then a relationship being built with the students. And I think that's something that needs to be actively taking place. And I don't think it goes purely one way, like the Alumni Association is in the wrong or whatever. I think it's something that needs to work for both parties involved. So it's just something to create that bridge. And I think that's definitely part of what fueled us in creating Black Book, was to help bridge that gap. And the why is, I think it's a much larger question to answer with one immediate task, but if I can give like a bigger overall, it would be, again, just an intimate relationship being built. And as Chase said, I think early better.
That resonates with me. And one thing that I would add on to that list for you all would definitely be introductions to influencers and access to funding. I think that's the last step that a lot of founding teams, those that are successful versus those that are not, are access to funds is a big area. That's the lifeblood of whether or not your company is successful, let's be clear. So with that said, I know we're about out of time, and I really appreciate this discussion that we've had, and we hope to have many more of these, another series with other folks that are in similar positions, different space, different companies, but sharing the story and the vision that we all have, because I think there is a similar thread across all of us, even though we're all at different phases of our career and different phases of our life. So with that said, the Alumni Berkeley Association, I really thank you for having us. This means a lot to me. Aisha, I thank you for joining. Chase, Ibrahim, Nahom, I thank you for being on and sharing your story. I hope many of you will follow the work that both of these groups are doing.